Did you realize your partner's crazy ex was actually telling the truth about them? I thought Jessica was just bitter. For 2 years, she'd been sending me messages on Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. Always the same warnings about my boyfriend Marcus. He's not who you think he is. Ask him about the restraining order. Check his phone while he sleeps. I'd show Marcus the messages, and he'd get this perfect mixture of hurt and exhaustion on his face. She's been stalking me since we broke up, he'd explain, running his hands through his hair. I feel terrible that she's dragging you into this. He painted her as unhinged, said she'd keyed his car, showed up at his work, threatened suicide when he wouldn't take her back. Classic crazy ex behavior, right? Marcus was incredible. He brought me coffee every morning, remembered every detail I shared, and never once raised his voice. When I got food poisoning, he held my hair back and cleaned my bathroom without complaint. When my mom was hospitalized, he drove 4 hours with me and slept in those terrible waiting room chairs. Perfect boyfriend material. The way we met felt like destiny. I was having the worst day at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. 3 patients coded, 2 families screaming at staff, and I'd spilled coffee all over my scrubs during my lunch break. I was crying in the parking garage when this handsome stranger approached with a tissue and a concerned smile. Rough day? Marcus asked gently. I was embarrassed to be sobbing in public, but something about his warm brown eyes made me feel safe. He listened while I vented about my terrible shift, never once checking his phone or looking impatient. You're incredible for doing what you do, he said when I finished. The world needs more people like you. He asked for my number, and I gave it without hesitation. Our first date was perfect. A quiet restaurant where he asked thoughtful questions about my work, my dreams, my family. He seemed genuinely fascinated by everything I said. I've never met anyone as compassionate as you, he told me over dessert. You have this light about you. By our third date, I was completely smitten. Marcus was attentive without being clingy, romantic without being cheesy, supportive without being patronizing. He remembered that I was lactose intolerant and always ordered dairy-free options. He knew I worked double shifts on Wednesdays and would leave encouraging texts to get me through the day. When he first mentioned his crazy ex, it was in the context of apologizing for being cautious about relationships. Jessica really did a number on me, he said sadly during our 1-month anniversary dinner. She made me feel like I couldn't trust my own judgment about people. He described a woman who'd become increasingly possessive and paranoid during their relationship, how she'd accused him of cheating with no evidence, how she'd go through his phone and interrogate him about female coworkers. I tried to be patient because I thought she just needed reassurance, Marcus explained. But it got scary. She'd show up at my apartment at 3 a.m. demanding to know where I'd been. She threatened to hurt herself if I ever left her. When Jessica's first message arrived 2 months into our relationship, Marcus's reaction seemed perfectly reasonable. I'm so sorry you have to deal with this, he said, showing genuine distress. I was hoping she'd moved on, but apparently not. The message was vague. Just ask him about Seattle with no context. Marcus explained that Jessica often made cryptic accusations that never led anywhere. She does this thing where she implies I'm hiding something without actually saying what, he said with a tired sigh. It's manipulation. She wants you to start doubting me, so our relationship falls apart. Over the next few months, Jessica's messages became more frequent, but remained frustratingly vague. Marcus always had reasonable explanations. Ask him about the second phone came when Marcus had just gotten a work phone from his consulting company. Ask him about the credit cards, arrived right after Marcus mentioned having to clean up his credit after identity theft. Ironically, he claimed Jessica had stolen his information during their relationship. Ask him about Portland made no sense because Marcus had never mentioned Portland, and when I brought it up, he seemed genuinely confused. I've never even been to Portland, he said, frowning. Why would she say that? I started to feel sorry for Marcus. Jessica's harassment was clearly causing him pain, and it was affecting our relationship too. Every message made me feel like I was being pulled into their toxic history. But Jessica's messages kept coming, more specific each time. Ask him why he has 2 phones. Ask him about the credit cards and his dead father's name. Ask him about Rebecca in Portland. I mentioned Rebecca casually one night while we were cooking dinner. Marcus was telling me about his day at work, laughing about a difficult client, when I said, speaking of difficult people, Jessica mentioned someone named Rebecca today. Marcus went completely still. The wooden spoon he'd been using to stir pasta sauce clattered against the pot. Where did you hear that name? His voice changed. Flat. Cold. Nothing like the warm tone I was used to. Just around, I said carefully, suddenly aware that the temperature in the room had shifted. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight, before forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Must be thinking of someone else. But I wasn't thinking of someone else. And I started paying attention. Marcus did have 2 phones. He claimed one was for work, but he guarded it like classified information. He received calls at odd hours and would step outside to answer them, even in winter. When I'd joke about his secret agent behavior, he'd laugh it off but never change the pattern. I also noticed how he'd positioned himself in our relationship. Gradually, subtly, he'd become my everything. My friends found him charming, but somehow I was seeing them less and less. Marcus always had thoughtful reasons why. Emma's been really negative lately, he'd say after I hung up with my best friend. I worry she's projecting her relationship problems onto you. Your mom seems stressed when you visit, he'd observe after family dinners. Maybe giving her some space would be healthier for both of you. He never forbade me from seeing anyone. He was too smart for that. Instead, he'd plant seeds of doubt that grew until I was making the choice to isolate myself. One night, while he was in the shower, I checked his work phone. I told myself I was just being paranoid, influenced by Jessica's messages. I'd proved to myself that Marcus was innocent. Then maybe I could block Jessica and move on with our relationship. The contact list made my blood run cold. Rebecca, Portland Ashley, Seattle Nina, San Diego Melissa, Phoenix Emma, Denver Katie, Austin. And at the bottom, Jessica, blocked. Each contact had the same pattern, dozens of deleted message threads, recent calls at 2 a.m., photos sent and received. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through Rebecca's messages. When are you coming back? You said just 6 months. I saw your girlfriend on Instagram. Does she know about us? Marcus, I'm pregnant. Please answer my calls. I need to know what to tell the baby. The doctor says I'm having complications. I'm scared. The timestamps showed these messages were from last week, while Marcus was supposedly on a business trip to Milwaukee. I scrolled through more conversations. Ashley in Seattle was planning their anniversary trip for next month. Nina in San Diego was asking when he'd be transferring to the California office permanently. Emma in Denver was upset because he'd missed her birthday dinner. Each woman seemed to believe she was in a committed, exclusive relationship with Marcus. The shower was still running. I screenshotted everything I could before putting the phone back exactly where I found it. When Marcus came out, towel around his waist, water still dripping from his hair, he looked perfectly normal, kissed my forehead, asked if I wanted to watch a movie. You seem tense, he said, settling beside me on the couch. Everything okay? I felt like I was living with a stranger. Just tired, I managed. He pulled me closer, stroking my hair with the same gentle touch I'd fallen in love with. You work too hard, he murmured. Let me take care of you. The words that used to comfort me now made my skin crawl. How many other women had he said those exact words to? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept peacefully beside me. Every breath he took sounded ominous. Every movement made me tense. Who was this person lying next to me? The next morning, I called in sick and drove to Jessica's address. I'd found it in his contacts under blocked with a note that said, emergency only, approach with caution. The apartment complex was nicer than I'd expected. Jessica answered the door looking nothing like the unhinged woman Marcus had described. Professional clothes, neat apartment, wedding ring on her finger. You finally believe me, she said simply. She made coffee and spread out a manila folder on her kitchen table. The folder was thick, organized with tabs and labels. This wasn't the obsessive rambling of a crazy ex. This was documentation. Marcus operates in cycles, she explained, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. He finds women in different cities, maintains relationships with 3 or 4 at once. He tells each of us the others are crazy exes or clingy friends. She showed me credit card statements and names I didn't recognize. Identity theft. He uses information from women he's dated to open accounts. My credit score dropped 200 points before I figured out what was happening. My stomach dropped. There's more, Jessica said gently. And it's worse than financial fraud. She pulled out police reports, hospital records, restraining orders. The first police report was from Seattle. Ashley Martinez, 28, nurse practitioner, admitted to hospital with injuries consistent with domestic violence. Suspect fled before arrest could be made. The second was from San Diego. Nina Rodriguez, 26, elementary school teacher. Restraining order filed after escalating threats and stalking behavior. The third was from Denver. Emma Thompson, 29, social worker. Identity theft, harassment, violation of restraining order. Marcus has a pattern, Jessica said quietly. He gets women isolated, financially dependent, then the abuse starts. Psychological first, then physical. The documents painted a horrifying picture. 3 different women in 3 different cities, all with similar stories of manipulation, control, and violence. Rebecca's in the hospital right now, Jessica said quietly. Broken ribs, fractured wrist, concussion. She finally pressed charges, but he disappeared before they could arrest him. She showed me hospital photos that made me sick. Rebecca looked like me. Same hair color, same build, same age, same trusting smile in the before photos Jessica had printed from social media. He has a type, Jessica continued. Mid-20s, works in healthcare or education, lives alone, family out of state. He researches us thoroughly before making contact. She showed me printouts from social media accounts I'd forgotten I had, dating profiles from years ago, public record searches, even my college graduation photo from a newspaper announcement my mom had submitted. How long have you been living together? She asked. 6 months. She nodded grimly. That's when it escalates. He's probably already isolated you from friends and family. I thought about the past few months, how Marcus had subtly discouraged girls' nights out, how he'd find reasons I shouldn't visit my parents. They were too demanding, the drive was too long, I needed to focus on my career. How he'd express concern about friends he claimed were toxic or using me. Emma, my best friend since nursing school, had stopped calling after Marcus mentioned she seemed jealous of our relationship. My weekly calls with my mother had dwindled to monthly, then every few months. Marcus was always supportive when I talked to them, but somehow I always felt drained afterward, like the conversations were more work than they were worth. The restraining orders don't work because he moves constantly, Jessica explained. Uses different names, different cities. By the time law enforcement catches up, he's already moved on to the next victim. She handed me a thick folder marked Sarah Chen, Chicago. I've been documenting everything for 2 years, building a case. Rebecca isn't his first victim to end up hospitalized, and she won't be the last unless we stop him. Inside the folder were copies of medical records, police reports, and testimony from 7 different women across 4 states. The pattern was identical every time. Love bombing phase, excessive attention, gifts, and affection, making the victim feel special and chosen. Isolation phase, gradually separating the victim from support systems through manipulation and subtle sabotage. Control phase, financial manipulation, monitoring communications, restricting movements. Abuse phase, psychological torture escalating to physical violence. Disposal phase, when the victim becomes too problematic or starts to fight back, he disappears and moves to the next target. The other women are ready to testify, Jessica said, but we need current evidence, something that proves he's still active, still targeting victims. She looked at me directly. "We need you to help us catch him." My hands were trembling as I processed everything. 2 years of warnings I'd dismissed. 2 years of red flags I'd ignored because Marcus was so charming, so perfect. "What do you need me to do?" Jessica explained the plan. The FBI had been building a case for interstate fraud and stalking, but they needed concrete evidence of ongoing crimes. I would continue acting normal while documenting everything: his activities, his phones, his finances, his communications with other victims. "Agent Rodriguez is the lead investigator," Jessica said, handing me a business card. "She's been tracking Marcus for 3 years. You can call her anytime, day or night. The moment you feel unsafe, you leave," Jessica emphasized. "Promise me. This isn't worth your life." I promised. But as I drove home, I wondered how I'd even know when I was unsafe. Marcus had never hurt me physically. He'd never even raised his voice. Everything dangerous about him was hidden beneath layers of charm and manipulation. Marcus was making dinner when I walked in, humming along to jazz music like he didn't have a care in the world. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs. He'd opened a bottle of wine and lit candles. "How was work, baby?" he asked, kissing my cheek with the same gentle affection as always. I forced a smile. "Fine, just tired." "I made your favorite," he said, gesturing to the stir-fry. "Thought we could eat and watch that documentary you mentioned." He was so normal, so loving. For a moment, I almost convinced myself Jessica was wrong. Maybe this was all an elaborate misunderstanding. Maybe Marcus really was the victim of a vindictive ex. Then I noticed his phone buzzing on the counter, Rebecca calling. Marcus saw me looking and smoothly flipped the phone face down. "Spam calls," he said casually. "Been getting them all day." But I'd seen the name. And I knew Rebecca was in the hospital with broken ribs, wondering why the father of her unborn child had disappeared. That night, I lay awake listening to him breathe beside me. This man who brought me flowers, who remembered my coffee order, who held me when I cried about difficult patients at work. This man who was apparently a predator. The next few weeks were torture. I documented everything while pretending nothing had changed. His second phone, his odd hours, his carefully crafted stories about work trips that I now knew were visits to other victims. I discovered he'd been using my personal information too. My social security number to run credit checks, my mother's maiden name to set up email accounts, my work address to have packages delivered that I never saw. He'd been systematically invading my privacy for months, and I'd never noticed because I trusted him completely. I installed a hidden camera app on my phone and started recording our conversations. The casual way he lied was chilling. When I asked about his trip to Milwaukee, he described meetings and clients that I now knew were fabricated. He was actually in Portland with Rebecca. "How was the Johnson account?" I asked over dinner. "Challenging," he said without missing a beat. "But I think we made good progress. The presentation went over well." He was such a good liar that I almost believed him myself. I also started paying attention to his stories about his past. Details that had seemed unimportant before now raised red flags. He claimed to be from Ohio, but his accent sometimes slipped into something that sounded more like Texas. He said his father had died in a car accident, but I'd heard him mention his father in present tense during phone calls. When I mentioned these inconsistencies, he always had explanations. The accent was from childhood friends. He still talked about his father in present tense because he missed him so much. Plausible, sympathetic, completely believable. I called Agent Rodriguez and set up a meeting. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who treated me with the kind of careful compassion reserved for trauma victims. "You're very brave for coming forward," she said in her FBI field office. "Marcus Webb, that's his real name, by the way, is one of the most sophisticated predators we've encountered." She showed me his file. Real name, Marcus Webb, born in Texas, age 34. History of fraud, identity theft, and domestic violence dating back to college. At least 12 known victims over 8 years. He's highly intelligent and extremely good at reading people, Agent Rodriguez explained. He studies his targets for weeks before making contact. "Everything about your relationship was calculated." She showed me surveillance photos of Marcus watching me before our chance meeting in the parking garage. Photos of him at the coffee shop where I bought my morning latte, learning my routine. Photos of him talking to my coworkers, gathering information about my personal life. "How did he know I'd be in the garage that day?" I asked, feeling sick. "He didn't. He'd been following your schedule for 2 weeks. He was waiting for the right opportunity, a moment when you'd be vulnerable and receptive to a kind stranger. The parking garage was just one of many attempts. If it hadn't worked, he would have tried something else. A flat tire he'd offer to fix. A spilled coffee he'd help clean up. A lost dog he'd ask me to help find. The profile says you're a nurse," Agent Rodriguez continued. "He specifically targets women in caring professions because you're predisposed to see the best in people and make excuses for concerning behavior. Everything I'd thought was special about our relationship, the way he understood me, the way he seemed to know exactly what I needed, was just him exploiting my psychology." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Keep documenting everything. We're particularly interested in evidence of the identity theft and the interstate pattern. If we can prove he's running multiple relationships across state lines while committing fraud, we can get federal charges that will stick." She gave me recording equipment and detailed instructions on how to gather evidence safely. "The most important thing is that you don't change your behavior in any way that might alert him," she emphasized. "Marcus is extremely perceptive. If he suspects you know, he'll disappear and start over somewhere else." The weight of that responsibility was crushing. Not just my safety, but the safety of Rebecca, Ashley, Nina, and all the future victims. Back home, I started my double life, loving girlfriend by day, undercover FBI informant by night. Marcus never suspected anything. If anything, he seemed more attentive than usual. He brought me lunch at work, sent sweet text messages throughout the day, planned romantic surprise dates. "You seem a little distant lately," he said one evening while we watched Netflix. "Is everything okay?" "Just tired," I said, the lie coming easily now. Work's been crazy. You're working too hard, he said, pulling me closer. Maybe you should cut back on those extra shifts. He'd been making this suggestion more frequently. Financial dependence was part of his control strategy. The more he could make me rely on him, the harder it would be to leave. I like the extra money, I said carefully. But I make enough for both of us, he replied. I want to take care of you. I recorded everything. 3 weeks into my investigation, Marcus announced another business trip. Denver this time, he said. 3 days. I'll miss you. I knew he was really going to see Emma, who'd been posting increasingly desperate messages about their relationship falling apart. The moment he left, I called Agent Rodriguez. We're going to search the apartment, she said. Do you know where he might hide things? We found everything hidden in a false bottom of his bedroom dresser. USB drives, prepaid phones, fake IDs, and most damning of all, journals. Each journal was labeled with a woman's name and contained detailed plans for manipulation and control. My journal was labeled Sarah Chen, Chicago, Target acquired March 2023. Inside were pages of observations about my habits, my fears, my vulnerabilities, plans for how to manipulate me, notes about my financial situation and family relationships. Subject responds well to small gestures of care. Coffee preference, oat milk latte, extra shot, no foam. Use for daily reinforcement of attentiveness. Mention of absent father during childhood triggers emotional response. Exploit for bonding opportunities and trust building. Works extra shifts at St. Mary's Hospital on weekends. Increasing fatigue makes her more susceptible to suggestion and less likely to question inconsistencies. Best friend Emma shows signs of suspicion. Begin gradual alienation campaign. Suggest Emma is jealous and unsupportive. Mother calls every Sunday at 2 p.m. Interfere with calls by scheduling activities or creating emergencies to establish pattern of unavailability. I was reading detailed notes about how to psychologically manipulate me. Marcus had been studying me like a lab rat from day one. The other journals were worse. They detailed his escalation with previous victims, when to start monitoring their phones, how to isolate them from support systems, when financial coercion became necessary, when physical intimidation was required. Rebecca's journal had pages marked final phase implementation, plans for how to disappear once she became problematic and started asking too many questions about his other relationships. Ashley's journal contained detailed financial information, her social security number, bank account details, credit card numbers. He'd been systematically draining her savings while she thought they were building a life together. Nina's journal had photos of her apartment, her work schedule, her family members. There were notes about her security system and which neighbors were home during the day. I photographed every page with shaking hands, barely able to process the level of calculation involved in his predatory behavior. When Marcus returned from Denver, I was waiting in our living room with Jessica, Agent Rodriguez, and 2 other FBI agents. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, fear, then that cold mask I'd glimpsed once before when I'd mentioned Rebecca's name. What's this about? He asked calmly, setting down his overnight bag like this was a perfectly normal scenario. Agent Rodriguez showed him a warrant. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for interstate stalking, identity theft, wire fraud, and violation of federal restraining orders. Marcus looked directly at me. His expression was almost disappointed, like I'd failed a test he'd expected me to pass. Sarah, whatever they've told you, it's not true. You know me, but I didn't know him at all. I'd fallen in love with a carefully constructed character designed to exploit my weaknesses. I found the journals, I said quietly. For the first time, his composure cracked completely. The mask slipped, and I saw the real Marcus underneath, cold, calculating, furious at being caught. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly as they put the handcuffs on him. As they led him away, he turned back one more time. You'll regret this, he said, not to the agents or Jessica. To me, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The trial took 8 months. 6 women testified about his pattern of abuse. Rebecca spoke from a wheelchair, her injuries still healing. She'd given birth to a daughter, Marcus's daughter, 3 months earlier. He disappeared the day I told him I was pregnant, she said on the witness stand. I haven't heard from him since until the police called about his arrest. Ashley testified about the financial fraud. He'd stolen over $40,000 from her accounts and opened credit cards in her name that she was still paying off. Nina described the stalking and psychological torture, how he'd convinced her to move across the country for a job that didn't exist, how he'd isolated her from her family and friends until she was completely dependent on him. Emma told the court about the physical abuse, how he'd started with playful pushing that gradually became violent, how he'd blamed her for making him angry until she believed it was her fault. The evidence was overwhelming. Credit fraud, identity theft, stalking, assault, violation of restraining orders across multiple states. Marcus was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 8 years. During the sentencing, his lawyer tried to paint him as a man with abandonment issues who just loved too deeply. Mr. Webb suffered from childhood trauma that led to unhealthy attachment patterns, the defense attorney argued. He never intended to cause harm. He was just desperately seeking connection. The judge wasn't buying it. Mr. Webb treated these women like targets in a hunting expedition, she said. This was calculated predatory behavior, not misguided romance. The level of planning and manipulation demonstrated in these crimes shows a complete lack of empathy and regard for his victim's humanity. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. You studied these women like prey. You learned their weaknesses specifically to exploit them. You destroyed their finances, their relationships, their sense of safety, and in some cases, their physical health. This court finds no evidence of redemption or rehabilitation potential in your behavior. Marcus sat quietly throughout the sentencing, showing no emotion. But as they led him away, he looked back at the gallery where all his victims sat together. He smiled. After the trial, Jessica and I stayed in touch. She'd remarried and was expecting her first child. Rebecca was in physical therapy but making good progress, and her daughter was healthy and beautiful. "How are you handling everything?" Jessica asked during one of our coffee dates 6 months after the sentencing. "Honestly, I was struggling. 2 years of my life had been a complete lie. I'd loved someone who saw me as prey. Worse, I'd ignored clear warnings because I'd been so desperate to believe in the fairy tale. I keep wondering if I'm stupid," I admitted. "How did I not see it?" "You're not stupid," Jessica said firmly. "He's just that good at what he does. That's what makes him dangerous." She was right. Marcus had spent years perfecting his technique. He knew exactly how to mirror what we wanted, how to make us feel special and chosen. He'd studied psychology and human behavior the way other people study medicine or law. "The FBI profiler said something that helped me," Jessica continued. "She said that our capacity for love and trust isn't a weakness. It's what makes us human. The problem isn't that we trusted too easily. The problem is that there are people in the world who exploit that trust." The hardest part was trusting my judgment again. Every date felt like a potential threat. Every kind gesture from a man made me suspicious. Every compliment felt like manipulation. I went to therapy twice a week and joined a support group for survivors of psychological abuse. Slowly, I started to understand that Marcus hadn't just stolen money and time, he'd stolen my ability to trust my own perceptions. "He made you doubt your reality," my therapist explained. "That's why this kind of abuse is so damaging. It doesn't just hurt your body or your bank account, it damages your sense of self." The other survivors in group therapy had similar stories, not necessarily with romantic partners, but with family members, friends, employers who'd used sophisticated manipulation tactics to control and exploit them. "The most insidious part," said Maria, who'd been financially abused by her brother, "is how they make you complicit in your own victimization. You start making excuses for them, covering for them, defending them to people who are trying to help you." That's exactly what I'd done with Jessica's warnings. Marcus hadn't needed to silence her. He'd trained me to do it myself. 1 year after Marcus's conviction, I got a call from Agent Rodriguez. "He's been running a romance scam from prison," she told me, "using contraband phones to target women on dating apps. We're building another case." Even behind bars, he couldn't stop. He'd convinced 3 different women to send him money for legal fees, claiming he was wrongfully convicted. One woman had sent over $5,000 before her sister intervened. "How is that possible?" I asked. "He's extremely persuasive," Agent Rodriguez said. "And there are always people willing to believe that everyone deserves a second chance." 2 months later, another woman reached out to me through Jessica. She'd been corresponding with Marcus for 6 months after meeting him through a prison pen pal website. He'd been telling her he was wrongfully convicted, painting himself as a victim of vindictive exes and a corrupt justice system. "He seemed so genuine," she wrote in her email, "so remorseful and eager to make amends. I was planning to visit him next month." She'd almost believed him until she found the trial records online and read our testimonies. "Thank you for speaking up," she wrote. "Without your testimony being public record, I might have become victim number 8. That's when I realized something important. Marcus had tried to break me, to make me feel worthless and crazy and small. Instead, he'd made me stronger, and he'd turned his victims into a network of women determined to protect each other. Jessica, the crazy ex he'd warned me about, had saved my life. Rebecca, Ashley, Nina, Emma, and I had saved each other by being brave enough to tell the truth. Now I'm the crazy ex warning his current targets, and I'll keep warning them until he can't hurt anyone else. I started a blog called The Crazy Ex Files, where survivors of psychological abuse share their stories. It gets thousands of views every month from people trying to figure out if their own relationships are healthy. The most common comment is, "I thought I was going crazy." That's how manipulation works. It makes you doubt your own perception of reality until you can't trust yourself anymore. But here's what I've learned. If multiple people are warning you about someone, listen. If your friends and family express concern about your relationship, listen. If your gut tells you something is wrong, listen. Because sometimes the crazy ex is the only one brave enough to tell the truth. 3 years later, I'm in a healthy relationship with David, a pediatric surgeon I met at a medical conference. He's never once asked me to keep secrets or questioned my friendships. He encourages me to trust my instincts instead of undermining them. When I told him about Marcus, he didn't try to fix me or convince me to get over it. He just listened and then said, "Thank you for trusting me with that. It must have been terrifying." David has met my friends and family. He encourages me to maintain close relationships with them. When Jessica visits Chicago, he insists on cooking dinner for all of us. He treats the other survivors like the heroes they are. "You saved each other," he says. That takes incredible courage. Marcus is still in prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 12 years. Jessica and I are already planning to be there when that hearing comes up. All of us will be there. Every woman he tried to destroy. We'll tell our stories again, as many times as necessary. Some exes really are crazy, but sometimes they're the heroes of the story. And sometimes the person everyone warns you about really is dangerous. Listen to the warnings. Listen to your gut. Listen to the women who came before you, because we're not crazy. We're survivors. My twin sister stole my identity to ruin my credit, so I returned the favor with her wedding. Maya and I were identical in every way except morals. For 23 years, we shared everything. Clothes, friends, even boyfriends occasionally. What I didn't know was that she'd been sharing my social security number too. I discovered it when I was denied for my dream apartment. The landlord looked at me like I was complete scum. "Ma'am, your credit score is 340. You have $47,000 in unpaid debts across 17 different accounts." My blood turned to ice. I'd never owned a credit card in my life. That night, I pulled my credit report and nearly vomited. Maya had opened 17 accounts in my name over 3 years. She'd bought a BMW, funded her master's degree, taken luxury vacations, and apparently lived off cash advances while I worked double shifts at a diner to save money for my future. The worst part? She'd been living in a luxury downtown loft with marble countertops while I shared a cramped studio apartment with 2 roommates who left dirty dishes everywhere. When I confronted her the next morning, she didn't even have the decency to deny it. "I needed the money," she said casually, filing her perfectly manicured nails. "Besides, we're twins. What's mine is yours, right? I figured you'd understand. You destroyed my entire financial future, Maya." She shrugged like I'd complained about borrowing a sweater. "You'll figure it out. You always do. You're the responsible one, remember?" For 6 agonizing months, I tried fixing it through legal channels. Fraud reports, police statements, credit disputes, lawyer consultations. Maya had been incredibly careful. She knew my social security number, my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name. Everything needed to convince banks and credit companies that she was actually me. The fraud investigators told me twin identity theft was nearly impossible to prove. Without video evidence of her physically making the purchases, it's essentially her word against yours. And she's covered her tracks well. Maya got engaged that fall to Richard, a successful investment banker who thought he was marrying sweet, financially responsible Maya. The same Maya who was planning their elaborate dream wedding with my stolen money. I found out about the engagement when she sent me a formal invitation with gold embossing. "I want you as my maid of honor," she said over coffee, beaming. "We're family, and family should celebrate together." That's when the realization hit me like a freight train. Legal justice wasn't coming fast enough, but there were other kinds of justice available. I started planning my revenge. Richard had absolutely no idea who he was really marrying. Maya had crafted this perfect false image, told him she was completely debt-free, had excellent credit, and worked as a volunteer coordinator at a nonprofit instead of admitting she'd never held a real job longer than 3 months. For the next 6 months, I became the supportive sister she thought I'd always be, helpful, involved in every single wedding detail. I offered to handle all the vendors since Maya was so busy with her demanding nonprofit work. I insisted on paying deposits up front to help with their cash flow situation. Richard thought it was incredibly generous and kept praising Maya for having such a wonderful, giving sister. What he didn't know was that I was methodically building an airtight paper trail. Every single vendor contract I signed included detailed liability clauses that I'd carefully crafted with the help of a lawyer friend. Every payment came with extensive documentation clearly stating the purchaser's identity and complete responsibility for any damages or unpaid balances. I made absolutely certain that my name appeared nowhere as the financially responsible party. Maya, meanwhile, was living it up like some kind of socialite princess. She'd started using my name for everything again: expensive spa treatments, designer dress fittings, jewelry shopping, even a weekend trip to Paris for her bachelorette party with 6 bridesmaids. All charged to credit cards in my name that she'd somehow managed to keep active despite my numerous fraud reports. I documented absolutely everything. Photos of her physically using my credit cards at restaurants and stores, screenshots of her social media accounts showing off purchases I'd never made, tagged with locations I'd never visited, bank statements proving that I was working overtime shifts just to afford my basic living expenses, while she charged thousands of dollars to my accounts daily. I created spreadsheets tracking every fraudulent purchase. I photographed receipts she'd carelessly thrown away. I even hired a private investigator to follow her for a week, documenting her spending habits and lifestyle that was completely incompatible with her claimed income. The investigator's report was damning. Maya would start her days at expensive coffee shops, charging $15 lattes and pastries to my American Express card. She'd spend hours at high-end boutiques, trying on clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. She'd get weekly manicures and pedicures at exclusive salons, always putting it on my stolen cards. Her social media told the story perfectly. Photos of her in designer outfits with tags still attached. Videos of her at expensive restaurants, ordering the most expensive items on the menu. Selfies from luxury spas where she'd get $200 facials and massage treatments. Meanwhile, my own social media showed the reality of my life. Pictures of me in my diner uniform, exhausted after double shifts. Posts about having to choose between groceries and gas money. Photos of my tiny apartment with hand-me-down furniture and a mattress on the floor. The contrast was stark and infuriating. 3 weeks before the wedding, I met with Richard's best friend Jake at a quiet coffee shop downtown. "I need to show you something extremely important," I said seriously. "But you have to promise to hear me out completely before you react." Jake was a corporate lawyer with a reputation for being thorough and fair. He understood evidence and legal implications. I laid out everything methodically: the credit reports showing years of fraud, the bank statements proving the financial damage, the photos of Maya using my identity, the police reports that had somehow been dismissed or ignored. Jake's face grew progressively paler with each document I presented. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, studying the evidence. "She's been systematically defrauding you for years. This isn't just identity theft. This is organized financial abuse. And now she's about to defraud your best friend in an even bigger way." I showed him Maya's completely fabricated employment records and financial statements that she'd provided to Richard. Richard thinks she makes $85,000 a year doing nonprofit work. He believes she has $30,000 in personal savings and excellent credit. He's planning their entire financial future based on these lies. She's never held a real job longer than 3 months in her entire adult life. The only money she has access to came directly from stealing my identity. Then I revealed the most damaging piece: recent credit applications from the past month where Maya had listed Richard's income and employment information to qualify for even more credit cards in my name. "She's planning to destroy my credit even further using his financial information as collateral," I explained. After they're legally married, the financial damage will increase exponentially. Shared assets, shared debt, shared legal responsibility for everything she's done. Jake studied the documents for a long time before speaking. This is criminal conspiracy, he said finally. She's not just stealing from you anymore. She's planning to use Richard as an unwitting accomplice. After marriage, he could be held legally responsible for debts she accumulates in your name, using his income as qualification. Exactly, I said. She's setting him up to be her next victim while continuing to destroy my life. Jake closed the thick folder of evidence and stared at me intently. What exactly do you want me to do with this information? I want you to help me make sure Richard knows exactly who he's marrying before he legally binds himself to a criminal, I said firmly. And I want Maya to face real consequences for what she's done to both of us. We spent the next 2 hours developing a comprehensive strategy that would expose Maya's crimes publicly while protecting Richard from further financial damage. Jake knew the legal system inside and out, and he helped me understand exactly how to present the evidence for maximum impact. The key is timing, he explained. We need to present this when she can't deny it, can't run, and can't manipulate the situation, when she's trapped and has to face the truth in front of everyone who matters to her. The wedding, I said immediately. The wedding, he agreed. We refined the plan over several more meetings. Jake would position Richard's family and key guests in advance, making sure they understood the seriousness of the situation. I would handle the documentation and evidence presentation. We'd coordinate the timing to ensure maximum impact while giving Richard the information he needed to protect himself legally. Jake also connected me with an FBI contact who specialized in identity theft cases. Agent Sarah Chen reviewed my evidence and confirmed that Maya's actions constituted multiple federal crimes. Twin identity theft is particularly difficult to prosecute, Agent Chen explained, but you've documented this incredibly well. The evidence is overwhelming. She agreed to attend the wedding as backup in case Maya tried to flee or became violent when confronted. The week before the wedding, Maya's spending reached insane levels. She charged $3,000 for her wedding dress alterations, another $2,000 for professional hair and makeup trials, $500 for shoes and accessories, $800 for lingerie and perfume. Every purchase was documented, every charge was photographed, every receipt was saved. She even used my credit to pay for her bridesmaid's spa day, costing $1,200 for 6 women to get massages and facials. The bridesmaids had no idea they were being pampered with stolen money. The rehearsal dinner alone cost $4,000, charged to my Visa card. Maya ordered premium champagne and the most expensive entrees for 30 guests. She gave a speech about family and love and gratitude, while literally stealing from me to pay for the evening. I smiled and applauded along with everyone else, knowing that in less than 24 hours, her world would collapse completely. The morning of the wedding, Maya stood in her $3,000 designer dress that she'd charged to my American Express card, completely unaware that her perfect day was about to transform into an absolute nightmare. I arrived at the venue early to help with final preparations, carrying a large accordion folder filled with meticulously organized evidence. You look absolutely beautiful, I told her, and genuinely meant it. Maya had always been stunning. Perfect bone structure, flawless skin, natural charisma. It's a huge part of how she'd managed to get away with everything for so long. The venue was truly spectacular. A historic mansion overlooking the lake with manicured gardens and marble terraces, costing $15,000 just for the day rental. Maya had charged every penny to my American Express card that somehow still hadn't been canceled, despite multiple fraud reports. The florist had created elaborate arrangements with white roses and peonies, costing $3,000. The photographer was a renowned artist, charging $5,000 for the day. The string quartet practicing in the corner had been hired for $2,000, every single expense charged to my stolen credit. Guests began arriving promptly at 2 p.m., dressed in their finest formal wear. Richard's family filled one side of the chapel. Doctors, lawyers, successful business owners, old money families who valued reputation and financial stability above almost everything else. Maya's family occupied the other side, looking slightly intimidated by the obvious wealth and status of Richard's connections. Our parents had always been middle class, honest people who worked hard for everything they had. They had no idea their daughter had been living a completely fabricated life for years. At 2:30, Richard pulled me aside privately in the mansion's library. I need to thank you personally for everything you've done, he said earnestly. Maya told me how incredibly supportive you've been, helping with wedding costs when her nonprofit work doesn't pay as much as she'd like. You're an amazing sister. My heart pounded as I prepared to destroy his world. Actually, Richard, I said gently, we really need to talk about that before the ceremony begins. I handed him a thick manila envelope with his name written in careful script. These are the real vendor contracts for today's wedding, and Maya's actual financial records. I think you need to see them before you make this legal commitment. His hand shook slightly as he opened the envelope. I watched his face change as he processed what he was reading. Confusion turned to shock, shock turned to disbelief, and disbelief turned to rage. This can't be right, he whispered, flipping through page after page of evidence. Maya doesn't have any credit cards. She told me she pays cash for everything because she doesn't believe in debt. Every single charge you're looking at was made with credit cards opened illegally in my name, I explained quietly. Maya has been using my social security number and personal information to fund your entire relationship. Richard's face drained of all color as he began to understand the magnitude of Maya's deception. The apartment you think she pays for with her nonprofit salary? Charged to my stolen credit. The BMW she drives? Financed using my identity? This wedding? Every single expense is on credit cards she opened by pretending to be me. He continued reading, his hands shaking more violently with each page. She even used your income information to qualify for additional cards. I continued. After marriage, you'd be legally responsible for helping pay debts she accumulated by stealing my identity. Richard looked up at me with horror in his eyes. How long has this been going on? 3 years. Maybe longer. He sat down heavily in a leather chair, the evidence scattered around him. Everything she's told me about herself is a lie. Everything. At 2:45, as guests were being seated in the beautiful chapel, Richard's parents approached me with barely controlled panic in their expressions. We understand there's been some kind of serious mistake, his mother said carefully, her voice tight with stress. Richard mentioned significant irregularities with the wedding payments and Maya's financial information. I showed them everything systematically. The credit reports documenting years of systematic fraud, the police documentation that had been filed and mysteriously dismissed, the overwhelming evidence that their son's fiancée had been using my stolen identity to fund their entire relationship and plan their wedding. Richard's father, a prominent attorney himself, reviewed the documents with professional scrutiny. This is organized criminal fraud, he said grimly. Multiple federal crimes. If Richard marries her, he could be held liable as an accessory after the fact. His mother's face was pale with shock and anger. That woman has been lying to our entire family for over a year. We've welcomed her into our home, included her in family events, treated her like a daughter. She's very good at manipulation, I said. She's had years of practice. Richard joined us, his face set in grim determination. I've made my decision, he announced. This wedding is not happening, and Maya is going to face consequences for what she's done. Where exactly is Maya getting ready right now? Richard's father asked, his voice deadly calm in the way that wealthy, powerful men sound when they're about to destroy someone's life. The bridal suite was located on the mansion's elegant second floor, overlooking the gardens. Maya was having her makeup professionally retouched, surrounded by 6 bridesmaids in lavender silk dresses and her mother, who was crying happy tears. Maya, I said softly, knocking and entering the room. We need to talk, privately, right now. She looked absolutely radiant, glowing with confidence and joy. Even when I firmly closed the door behind us and asked everyone else to give us a moment, she didn't sense any danger approaching. What's wrong, honey? You look so serious. Are you nervous about the ceremony? Don't worry. Everything's going to be perfect. I handed her a credit card statement. $12,000 charged in just the past month alone. All in my name. This needs to stop. Today. Right now. Maya barely glanced at the statement, waving it away dismissively. I honestly don't know what you're talking about. This is my wedding day. Can't we discuss whatever this is later? I need to finish getting ready. The vendor contracts for this entire wedding are written in my name, I said slowly and clearly. The legal liability for every expense today falls directly on me if payments aren't made. But here's the thing, Maya. I never signed a single contract or authorized any payments. For the first time, genuine uncertainty flickered across her perfectly made-up face. What are you talking about? I handled all the wedding arrangements myself, using credit cards you opened illegally in my name, I said firmly. Using my social security number, my personal information, my identity. You've been committing federal crimes for years. Maya's confident expression began to crack. You're being dramatic. I borrowed some money, that's all. I'll pay it back. $50,000, Maya. You've stolen $50,000 from me, and you've been using Richard's income to qualify for even more credit in my name. She stood up abruptly, her wedding dress rustling. You're trying to ruin my wedding day out of jealousy. Maya, I need you to confess everything, right now. To Richard, to his family, to everyone downstairs. Tell them exactly what you've done with my identity and my credit. She laughed, but it sounded forced and brittle. You're being completely ridiculous. It's my wedding day. I'm not confessing to anything because I haven't done anything wrong. Actually, I said quietly, today is the day you finally face real consequences for 3 years of federal crimes. I pulled out my phone and showed her a text message from Agent Chen, in position, waiting for your signal. Maya's face went white. You called the FBI? I called the FBI. At exactly 3 p.m. when the ceremony was supposed to begin, Richard's groomsmen were positioned at all the exits, while Richard himself stood at the altar with a wireless microphone instead of waiting for his bride. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice echoing clearly through the flower-filled chapel. I need to make an important announcement before we proceed with today's ceremony. Maya appeared at the back of the aisle in her stunning wedding dress, confusion rapidly turning to panic as she realized something was terribly wrong with the scene before her. It has come to my attention through irrefutable evidence, Richard continued, his voice steady and clear, that my fiancé has been living an elaborate lie, not just to me but to everyone gathered here today. He held up the thick folder of credit reports and financial documents. Maya has systematically stolen her twin sister's identity for 3 years. She's accumulated nearly $50,000 in fraudulent debt in her sister's name. She's never held the nonprofit job she claimed to have. She's never had the savings account she claimed to possess. Everything about our relationship and this wedding has been built on criminal fraud. The chapel erupted in shocked gasps and murmurs. Guests turned to stare at Maya, who stood frozen in the aisle. Maya started walking toward the altar desperately, her face a mask of panic. Richard, please let me explain. This is all a misunderstanding. The woman you think you know as Maya has been committing federal crimes that would have made me an unwitting accomplice after marriage, he said firmly. I will not legally bind myself to a criminal who has been using my financial information to commit additional fraud. Richard's family looked mortified and angry. Our parents appeared stricken with disbelief and shame. Maya's bridesmaids stared in complete shock, their bouquets forgotten in their hands. But I still wasn't finished with my plan. I stood up slowly from my seat in the front row, turning to face the entire congregation. Maya, You have exactly two choices right now, I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent chapel. You can confess everything publicly, right here, right now, and work with me to fix the financial damage you've caused. Or I can signal the FBI agent who's waiting outside in the parking lot to come in and arrest you in front of everyone you know. Maya's face completely crumpled as the reality of her situation finally hit her. She looked desperately around the chapel, at Richard's disgusted expression, at his parents' cold, judgmental stares, at our mother's tears of shame, at the guests who were pulling out their phones to record her humiliation. I never meant for any of it to go this far, she whispered into the microphone, her voice breaking. Tell them everything, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. Tell them exactly what you've done and how long you've been doing it. What followed was the most complete and humiliating confession I'd ever witnessed in my life. Maya admitted to opening numerous accounts in my name using my social security number. She confessed to using my credit to fund her entire lifestyle for years. She acknowledged lying about her job, her income, her savings, her entire financial identity. She admitted to forging my signature dozens of times on important financial documents. She described how she'd memorized my personal information and used it to convince bank representatives that she was me, how she'd intercepted mail and statements to hide her crimes, how she'd deliberately gotten me turned down for apartments and loans to cover her tracks. The confession went on for nearly 20 minutes, with Maya detailing crime after crime while the chapel sat in stunned silence. Richard's father stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. This wedding is officially over. Security will escort anyone who wishes to leave immediately. Half the chapel emptied within minutes, guests practically running to avoid being associated with the scandal. The other half stayed to watch the complete social and financial meltdown happening before their eyes. Richard approached Maya at the altar, removing his boutonniere and dropping it at her feet. We're done forever, he said simply but firmly. I'll be filing a comprehensive police report about the fraudulent financial information you provided me. You used my income and employment details to qualify for additional credit cards in your sister's name. That makes me a victim of your crimes too. Maya collapsed into a chair at the altar, still wearing her expensive wedding dress, mascara and foundation streaking down her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. Our mother approached the altar, her face a mixture of shame and heartbreak. Maya, how could you do this to your own sister? To your family? Maya looked up at her through tears. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just needed money, and it seemed so easy. Easy? I said, walking up to join them. Destroying my credit, ruining my future, stealing my identity. That seemed easy to you? You always had everything figured out, Maya said bitterly. Good grades, good job. Everyone always said you were the responsible one. I just wanted to have nice things too. So you decided to steal them from me. But my revenge plan still wasn't completely finished. The reception was supposed to take place at the same venue immediately following the ceremony. 200 guests, a 5-course gourmet dinner, premium open bar, live band, elaborate floral arrangements. Everything charged to my stolen credit cards over the past several months. I found the catering manager in the kitchen, overseeing final preparations for a reception that would never happen. I need to speak with you urgently about payment for today's entire reception, I said seriously. She looked confused and slightly panicked. Everything's been completely handled. Maya prepaid everything months ago through our payment plan. I showed her the vendor contracts, every single one containing the liability clauses I'd carefully crafted with legal assistance. Actually, everything was charged to fraudulent credit cards that were opened illegally in my name. This entire event was paid for with stolen funds that are now being investigated by federal authorities. The manager's eyes widened in horror as she understood the implications. What exactly does that mean for our business and today's reception? It means Maya is personally responsible for the full cost of everything, I explained calmly. And since the credit cards were fraudulent, you'll need to collect payment directly from her before serving any food or alcohol. The catering manager immediately called her supervisor, who called the venue owner, who called their attorney. Within an hour, Maya was presented with bills totaling $23,000 for the reception costs. I watched with satisfaction as Maya tried desperately to explain to the increasingly angry venue staff that she couldn't possibly pay such an enormous amount immediately, that all her available money was tied up in accounts that were now frozen by fraud investigations, that she needed time to figure things out and make payment arrangements. Ma'am, the venue manager said firmly, if full payment isn't resolved immediately, we'll need to cancel the entire reception and involve our legal team to recover our costs. This constitutes fraud against our business as well. Maya turned frantically to her parents, to Richard's remaining family members, to her bridesmaids, to anyone who might be willing to help her. But the room was emptying rapidly as people distanced themselves from the scandal. No one wanted to be associated with a confirmed fraudster and identity thief. Her bridesmaids, still in their lavender dresses, approached her cautiously. Maya, one of them said carefully, we need to know, did you pay for our spa day and dresses with stolen money too? Maya's silence was answer enough. The bridesmaids exchanged horrified looks and began removing their bouquets and jewelry. We can't be part of this, another bridesmaid said. We had no idea we were accessories to credit card fraud. One by one, Maya's support system crumbled around her as people realized the extent of her deception. By 5 p.m., the venue was completely empty except for catering staff cleaning up and removing decorations, security guards ensuring no one stole anything, and a very expensive 3-tier wedding cake that would never be served to celebrating guests. The cake alone had cost $800, charged to my MasterCard. Maya found me in the parking lot as I was loading evidence boxes into my car, preparing to drive to the FBI field office. This is all your fault, she hissed venomously, still wearing her wedding dress but now looking disheveled and desperate. You deliberately ruined my wedding day out of pure spite and jealousy. I looked at her, still in her designer gown, makeup completely ruined, standing completely alone in an empty parking lot, surrounded by the debris of her collapsed life. No, Maya, you ruined your own wedding when you decided to build your entire life on lies, theft, and criminal fraud. I'll fix everything, she said desperately, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. I'll pay you back every penny. I'll make this right. I'll get a job and work for the rest of my life to repay you. You'll face the legal consequences of your crimes, I said, removing her hand from my arm. The FBI is officially investigating now based on the evidence I've provided. Richard's pressing criminal charges for the fraudulent information you gave him. The venue is suing for fraudulent payment methods, and every credit card company has your real name and address now. Agent Chen approached us from across the parking lot, flanked by 2 other federal agents. Maya Thompson, she said formally. I'm Agent Chen with the FBI. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding multiple counts of identity theft and credit card fraud. Maya's face went completely white. I want a lawyer. That's your right, Agent Chen replied. But based on the evidence we've reviewed and the confession you made in front of over 100 witnesses, I'm placing you under arrest. I watched as they read Maya her rights and escorted her to their vehicle, still wearing her wedding dress. The last thing I saw was her looking back at me through the car window, her face a mixture of hatred and defeat. I drove away slowly, leaving behind the ruins of what should have been the happiest day of her life. The investigation moved quickly from there. Maya's crimes were so well documented that prosecutors called it one of the most clear-cut identity theft cases they'd ever seen. The evidence I'd gathered was comprehensive and irrefutable. Maya's court-appointed lawyer advised her to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. The alternative was going to trial with overwhelming evidence against her, which could have resulted in a much longer prison term. 3 months later, Maya stood before a federal judge and pled guilty to multiple federal charges including identity theft, credit card fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. She received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay full restitution, every penny she'd stolen from me, plus interest, penalties, and damages. The total amount came to $67,000. Richard married his college girlfriend the following spring, someone who actually existed and had her own legitimate income and credit history, someone who didn't need to steal another person's identity to afford her lifestyle. At his new wedding, which I attended as a guest, Richard's best man made a toast about the importance of honesty and trust in relationships. Everyone who had been at Maya's attempted wedding understood the deeper meaning. I got my credit completely restored, my name legally cleared, and my financial future back on track. It took nearly 2 years of paperwork, phone calls, and legal proceedings, but every fraudulent account was closed and every negative mark was removed from my credit report. The apartment I'd originally been denied, I was approved immediately once my real credit score was restored. I moved in 6 months after Maya's sentencing, finally able to afford the place I'd dreamed of. Maya served her full sentence in federal prison. I heard from our mother that prison was difficult for her. She wasn't used to having no money, no luxury items, no way to manipulate people into giving her what she wanted. And Maya now? She was released 8 months ago and works at a grocery store in our hometown, living in our parents' basement, paying me $200 every month for the rest of her natural life. Every monthly payment comes with a handwritten note that says the same thing. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I know I can never undo the damage, but I'm trying to make it right. It's not nearly enough to undo the years of damage she caused. The stress, the humiliation, the financial devastation, the time lost fighting to restore my identity. But it's a start toward real accountability. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store when I'm shopping. She always looks away, unable to meet my eyes. She knows that everyone in town knows what she did. Her reputation never recovered from the public confession at her failed wedding. Richard occasionally sends me updates on his life. He's happily married now with a baby on the way. He thanks me regularly for saving him from what would have been a disastrous marriage built on lies. Maya never married. According to our mother, she hasn't dated anyone since her release from prison. Apparently, it's difficult to build relationships when you have a federal fraud conviction and everyone knows you're capable of stealing your own sister's identity. The experience changed me in ways I'm still understanding. I learned that sometimes you have to create your own justice when the system fails you. I learned that family loyalty has limits, especially when that family member is actively destroying your life. Most importantly, I learned that revenge, when executed perfectly, can be far more satisfying than forgiveness. Maya destroyed my credit, but I destroyed her entire future. She stole my identity for 3 years, but I made sure she'll be paying for it for the rest of her life. Every month when that $200 payment arrives with its apologetic note, I'm reminded that some actions have permanent consequences. Maya learned that lesson the hard way, in front of everyone who mattered to her, on what should have been the happiest day of her life. And honestly, I sleep better at night knowing that justice was finally served, even if I had to serve it myself.